Just how good is Dr. Ratio's Lightcone? Since Dr. Ratio is going to be a free unit for a limited time, this gives you a golden opportunity to pull for his Lightcone. In this video, I'll show you why you should heavily consider grabbing his Lightcone because it's a banger. And compared to his other options, you'll definitely want to find out how it compares. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Firstly, what does it even do? It increases his crit damage by a flat 20% for every debuff on the enemy target, whereas crit damage dealt increases by an additional 8% up to 3 stacks, so that means we need at least 3 debuffs to maximize this part of the Lightcone, which synergizes perfectly with his kit. When using an ultimate to attack an enemy target, the wearer receives the Disputation effect, which increases damage by 36%. This appears to be a global damage increase, so that means it will affect his ultimate, his skills, his basic attacks, and his follow-up attacks. And then the final part of the Lightcone is that it enables him to ignore 24% of the enemy's defense when using follow-up attacks. Follow-up attacks are a core part of Dr. Ratio's kit, so being able to ignore defense is just lots of extra damage. So not only is this Lightcone perfect for Dr. Ratio, but this has very high potential to be a really generic Lightcone to be used on characters later down the road. In a nutshell, if you activate everything in this Lightcone, you are getting a 48% boost to crit damage, 36% damage bonus, and a 24% defense ignoring ability. And so why did I mention that this Lightcone could be generic? Well, first off, debuffs on enemies is very generic. We can easily build a team to activate that part of the Lightcone. As long as future hunt characters have damaging ultimates, which is totally likely because they are indeed hunt characters and they focus on dealing damage. Currently, the only hunt character that doesn't have a damage dealing ultimate is Topaz, which hers is an enhance. But there's a very good chance that future characters are going to have damage dealing ultimates. There's no way that Hoyo is just going to keep pumping out enhancing type ultimates on hunt characters. Now, it is possible that Hoyoverse never ever makes another hunt character with a follow-up attack mechanic, of course, but that's severely limiting their design choices in my opinion. And even if said future hunt characters don't have follow-up attack mechanics in their kit, they can still utilize the other parts of the Lightcone to great effect, albeit it's just not using the Lightcone to its 100% optimal value. But this Lightcone is possibly a very great option for low spenders for the reasons that I just stated. Now, for Dr. Ratio specifically, currently many of the Lightcones in the game just are not very good for him. In terms of 5 stars, there really aren't any Lightcones that synergize perfectly with his kit, either in the gacha or not. There's Cruising in the Stellar Sea, which is his best 5-star option, not including his signature Lightcone. And then in terms of 4 stars, the reality is that he's barely got any good options there. So let's go ahead and break it down starting with the 5 stars. So Cruising in the Stellar Sea is best alternative 5-star Lightcone, and if we just compare the buffs between the two Lightcones, S5 Cruising is 32% crit rate and 40% attack bonus versus 48% crit damage, 36% damage bonus, and 24% defense ignoring. So when comparing the crit boosts, the 32% crit rate is technically better because typically the ratio between crit rate and crit damage is 1 to 2. But the damage boost is definitely in favor of his signature Lightcone at 36% and at 24% defense ignoring. Attack bonus is also conditional. You need to kill an enemy in order to activate it. It also lasts only 2 turns, and so you're fighting an elite enemy that doesn't spawn mobs, then you'll be unable to activate that attack bonus because you have nothing to kill. Now, of course, sometimes mob enemies spawn at the start, but then you're only going to have that attack bonus for 2 turns. So unless you're killing that elite mob within 2 turns, then you lose the value on that attack bonus, which is entirely possible. You can build your ratio to be an absolute Chad to kill elite mobs within 2 turns. And perhaps that is indeed the goal. But that might not be the reality for many players. And then Yanqing's Lightcone, it gives a crit damage boost of 30%, but compared to Dr. Ratio's Lightcone, which is 38%, clearly Dr. Ratio's Lightcone beats it there. And then this crit rate boost is not exactly the consistent, and consistency is key. The uptime on the crit rate boost is also only once every turns, which is quite a long downtime. Zila's Lightcone is heavily dependent on building speed on your relics and having speed boosts from your teammates. Also, the problem with this light cone is that the damage boost only applies to skills and basic attacks, where Dr. Ratio's kit is more focused on his follow-up attacks, which is coming from his talent. So that move doesn't get any damage boosts. So basically, we only get the 18% crit rate, and then this extra damage bonus on our skills and ultimates if we are able to reach at least 160 speed. Now moving on to the 4 stars, Swordplay is definitely one of the better 4-star light cones in the game, but it does not synergize with Dr. Ratio's kit very well. So for each time the wearer hits the same target, damage dealt increases by 8%, stacking up to 5 times. S1 it's 40%, S5 it's 80%. So if we can hit that 80% damage bonus, it is quite strong. However, the problem is that Dr. Ratio's kit doesn't hit a target multiple times. For example, Topaz, Numby hits multiple times and she's able to get the stacks in one skill. However, with Dr. Ratio, his follow-up attacks only hit the enemy once. So a very, very slow build up to get the maximum stacks here. And then also, when you switch enemies, the buffs go away completely. Against weaker mob type enemies, you're not really going to be having that damage bonus uptime for very long. And then against those elite mobs, it's going to take multiple turns in order to get your maximum buff up. So in essence, it's just very slow. It works, but slow. Now, only silence remains. When you just compare the buffs at a surface level here, it just pales in comparison to his signature light cone. At S5, we have 32% attack increase and 24% crit rate, whereas with his signature light cone, again, it was 38% crit damage, 36% damage bonus, and a 24% defense ignoring mechanic, plus the extra stats. So although decent, not amazing. This also, although for matchups where hunt characters excel, this is perfect. Now, the free light cone, River Flows in Spring, is just very inconsistent. The only thing that's consistent about this is the speed, because when Dr. Ratio takes damage, the damage bonus is going to go away. So again, consistency is always key, so when our buffs just don't have high uptime, it's not the Battle Pass light cone. Just comparing the buffs, pales in comparison. This one only gives us crit rate, and then a chance to dispel a buff. This one is definitely better used in very specific matchups where you need to dispel a buff on an enemy, like the Mara Struck Elite enemy. But there are plenty of other ways to dispel buffs on enemies than to use up your light cone slot for it. Subscribe for more. Doesn't really buff his follow-up attack damage, so we're not really seeing great returns on this light cone. It's pretty much all that we have to say about this. Until we get a character that wants to use their basic attack and skills more often and also keep their energy at max, then this light cone is really just going to stay overshadowed. Now let's go into some concrete comparisons on his light cone. Let's very quickly go over the build. It's a typical crit build where we are switching out light cone. So when he has his signature light cone, his crit ratio is about 42 to 238, and since his light cone gives him plenty of crit damage, we replace the substat with 15% crit rate. And then, for example, when we go to cruising in the Stellar Sea, we will switch that substat to crit damage because that light cone gives us plenty of crit rate. Now he's also got an imaginary orb, attack percentage link rope. He's going to be using speed boots. He's also going to be using speed boots, although not shown here. And then his body is going to be crit damage. His relic set is going to be the Banishry of Wastelander, the Imaginary set, and the Firmament of Glamoth, giving him some extra damage bonus if his speed reaches the correct levels. I've added in all of his traces, the extra crit and crit damage from the 4-piece set, his light cone buffs, which ends up being 44% extra crit damage, because it's 20% from the base and then an extra 24% from the 3 stacks if you have 3 debuffs on the enemy. So that totals about an extra 44% crit damage. And then some extra buffs from his traces, 15% crit rate and 30% crit damage. He has a trace that allows him to reach that. Alright, now let's go ahead and jump into the comparisons. I will compare his signature light cone to cruising in the Stellar Sea first, because in terms of buffs and stats, this is a light cone that comes even remotely close. And so I have 3 data points to look at. One is cruising in the Stellar Sea when I kept the 15% crit rate and did not change the crit damage substat, and the other one was when I did change the crit damage substat. So the crit ratios are a bit different here. So looking at the damage, you can see that the difference is quite large. This is of course when we hit our crit hits. 21.5% difference when we hit a crit using the lower crit damage ratio, 34% on our ultimates, 34% on our talent, and 21% on our ultimate. And then when we use the higher crit damage ratio, 74-194, the difference is a little bit better. 10% here when we hit our crits, 24% on our talents, and 10.9%, 11% on our ultimates. Skill and ultimate is the same difference because the amount of buffs there is the same. Our talent changes because we get that extra defense ignoring mechanic. Now, since cruising in the Stellar Sea gives us so much crit rate, we should take a look at average damage, as the crit ratio on cruising is a little bit better. So the crit ratios are the same as above here, just not written out. And if we take a look at the average damage, then it turns out that cruising in the Stellar Sea pulls ahead 5.6% on skill with the 89-164 crit ratio, 4.6% on the 74-194 ratio. Same goes for our ultimate. However, the average damage on our talent, which is our follow-up attacks, still is in favor of his signature Lightcone, the difference being about 7% to 8%, depending on the crit ratio. And you can always see the visualization here on the right side. Now, Swordplay is definitely his theoretical best 4-star if you maximize benefits, but I would also say that Only Silence Remains is going to be his better practical Lightcone because it's a lot easier to activate the set effects. But I'm still going to compare the maximum potential of Swordplay versus its signature. But in practice, I would probably use Only Silence Remains over Swordplay. So when we take a look at the damage difference here, maximum Swordplay stacks, the difference is 6.5% on the skill and ultimate and 19% on the talent. Then in terms of average damage, it's 3.3% on the skill and ultimate, 16% on the follow-up attacks. Fairly straightforward, but of course, yes, the 4-star is going to perform worse than the signature. So there you have it. That is Dr. Ratio's Lightcone and how it compares to all of the other options currently in the game. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I'm sure a lot of you guys wanted to see the Only Silence Remains comparisons as well, but I just did not have time to make that comparison. So perhaps I can make a community post. Keep an eye out for that to see the comparisons, or of course join the Discord where I sometimes post my calculations in there as well. So until next time, thanks for watching. Drop a comment down below, like the video if you made it this far. See you in the next one.